Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, and I get so excited, so passionate about bringing the things I've learned over the years, studying psychology, being a mediator, being a conflict enthusiast. Conflict enthusiast? What? Well, yes, I am, because I love helping people move beyond their fears, their biases, and their distortions. We all have fears, we all have biases, and we all have distorted thinking. After all, that's the bedrock of human engagement, human disputes. Have you ever been totally baffled by how differently people look at the same thing? Their inability and sometimes their unwillingness to see what you see almost seems intentional or simply idiotic. And guess what? They probably think the same about you. What drives such totally different perspectives? Well, there are many layers. How can people be so opposite of each other in how they look at things, how they view things, how they interpret things? And then what drives people into conflict with one another? It's around these differences. The fascinating thing about human beings, we are alike in so many ways, and yet the combinations of how we show are so very different, and there are many, many layers. Let's take a look at 3 common ways that we are similar and yet so very different. The first is all around fear. What? There are different kinds of fears? Yes, there are. It's really the bedrock. Fear serves as the bedrock for our drive to survive. What's out there, real or perceived? Do I have to be ready to run towards it or run away from it? Or just simply freeze in my ability to do anything about it? If we understand the dynamics of human behavior and how we communicate, we recognize that there are 4 main styles of communication. And if you don't know what they are, take my Spice game at my website to learn more. Each style has a different focal point, timing, way of speaking, and also driven by their underlying fears and needs. For the extroverted, fast-paced person, their needs center on being in control or being included, wanting to be heard. So their fear is about being out of control or being excluded from what's going on, their viewpoint not considered in making decisions. For the introverted, slower-paced, the needs focus on being right or wanting everyone to just get along. Fear is generated when feeling wronged or being made to look wrong, or when somebody is trying to control and dominate. Are we seeing some patterns here already? Maybe. Being aware of the context and dynamics around people and their behavior, particularly when in conflict, helps guide us in making healthy choices to uncover and redirect behaviors when they start escalating. You don't have to be a professional mediator or psychologist like me to do this, but instead develop a deeper understanding of some key drivers behind human behavior when needs are not getting met. Being aware of the common triggers for emotional flare-ups oftentimes is around these needs not getting met. It's knowing what to look for and to listen for, because we easily react to what we see and what we hear. After all, it's about 93% of how we communicate. 93%. It oftentimes is nothing about the message. So it's not so much what you say, it's how you say it, how you deliver your message. And that's why diving deeper into communication styles, uncovering our emotional intelligence, recognizing the conflict management styles that exist, and then learning how to work with them and manage them appropriately. So again, it's about how we show up, the words we use, the impact we have on others because of what we have called mirror neurons in our brains. And so with all of these things coming together, we all actually operate with some preconceived bias, oftentimes unconscious, sometimes very conscious, based on what we see and hear from others around us. Now let's take a look at bias. The attitudes, as I like to call them, or biases, can lead us to erroneous assumptions and instinctively categorize people in ways that may not be fair, just based on what we see and what we hear. After all, we all know what the word assume means, right? And if you don't, then contact me later. A quick example of bias is oftentimes reflected in the word should. You should do this, or you should do that. I should be doing this. And so oftentimes, our beliefs about what should be done is really a reflection of how we see things and what we believe needs to be done as the right way to do things. Not the only way, but the right way. And so we oftentimes lack awareness around other opportunities and perspectives for how things could be done differently. Sound familiar? Well, this is what we would call selective perception bias, is that I'm going to focus on what I want to do, what I see needs to be done, and I'm going to discount anybody else's perspective that's going on. That's definitely a bias. Another common bias centers on discounting an idea or an offer expressed simply based on who is saying it. We see this a lot in relationship issues, whether it's personal, family, marital, or if it's in the job. And so this is where, if depending if I like you or not, or what my bias might be towards you, I might discount what you say just because it's coming from you. That's what we call reactive devaluation bias. We devalue whatever their idea is or discount it, rejecting it just on who is saying it or who is putting it out there. That's why, by the way, mediation can be such a powerful tool to use your mediator to frame offers and proposals. Another big one is confirmation bias. We will only look for information or people who will confirm our beliefs and our perspectives. Now, haven't we seen a lot of that going on in this last year or so on so many fronts? But let's move on. What are some common cognitive distortions that drive how people show up? Well, most likely we've all been called a name or two or many by others throughout our lives. And oftentimes it does come out of someone's anger. And so I'd like to point out, for many of us, we may have grown up with that children's ditty. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that is probably the biggest mistruth in the history of humankind, because words do matter. Words hurt. Words imply things that we may or may not believe about ourselves or others. And again, it reflects a bias. It reflects a distortion of what's really going on. So being called something, being labeled as something, often characterizes us in a negative light, and one we don't agree with. We see ourselves different. We see ourselves separate. We in turn may have our own distortion about how we see each other. And so that's part of the work that we want to do as we grow in our professions, build our skills in our communication, is to find congruence, coherence between how I see myself, for example, and how you see myself, and being able to have courageous conversations that may be challenging, but still have those conversations accordingly. That's how we grow. That's how we can build relationships. That's how we can help people feel safe, be heard, be cared for, be supported, be respected, and be honored. Because name calling is really a distortion referred to as labeling. Calling someone stupid or ascribing a characteristic like cheater or liar to someone feels like an attack. And what do we do when we feel attacked? We want to fight back. And it does feel that somebody is singling us out as people rather than focusing on behaviors. Because when we feel attacked as a person, it's like, where do I go? There's no room. I've been stuck in this box. But when we can identify the behavior that's problematic or challenging, well, you know what? I can do something about my behavior. Again, how I show up, the words I use. And so when we feel attacked, it goes right back to those fears from before. And when we are in a state of fear, we're not in a state of cognitive awareness. And so we may make erroneous decisions, erroneous reactions, and simply escalate the situation out of control. And with all of this, we do form opinions or attitudes about the person doing the labeling, and that person in turn has formed their opinion about us, about me, that we tend to carry forward, clouding future interactions, future conversations, and certainly the future of this relationship. I mean, after all, how many times have you seen relationships fall apart by unresolved differences, ongoing hurts, and not being able to let go of the feelings that have built up and now the attitudes we've created toward the other person? One other cognitive distortion that I would like to point out is that black or white, all or nothing. And so be mindful of the words that you hear, but also what you say. There's seldom anything that's all or seldom anything that's nothing. And so it's one or the other, my way or the highway. And it's either this or that, but nothing in between. And yet we know from a mediation dispute resolution perspective, as long as we sort of identify our high point, our best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and our low point, our least desirable alternative to a negotiated agreement, our WATNA, then there's a whole bunch of room in between that become possibilities. And so that's some of the mindset that we want to bring to our conversations with others or in working with people in dispute resolution. So between our underlying fears, unconscious or unconscious, biases held about others, or distortions in our thinking, they are all there. And several layers, again, to understand where people are coming from and what shows up in their lives. Because when we can recognize this, we are doing a huge service to ourselves and to those around us when we can help them uncover this. Our world is full of many examples of how fears, biases, and distortions show up. And again, just look at this last year. The things we see on television, the conversations we hear, the headlines on the news, all of these different events reflect fears driving people's behavior, the biases that are held towards other people, and certainly the distortions in their thinking. So it's time that we really take a look at our emotional intelligence, not just our intellectual intelligence, but to see how we can grow ourselves as well as others. What we can do to increase our self and other awareness. Again, what do we know about how we show up, but also what do we see and how others show up? And then also self-management. If we're a reactive kind of person, probably something to work on. Or how do we manage that relationship if somebody else is that reactive personality? And so that's what decoding the conflict mindset is all about, is understanding these different nuances in human behavior. So I encourage you to subscribe here if you haven't already so that you're alerted to upcoming episodes and webinars so that we can continue this deeper dive into understanding the dynamics of human behavior. It's rich, it's fascinating, and we'll keep bringing you more. After all, there are 9 triggers to emotional flare-ups. Do you know what they are? There are 12 different biases. We just touched on a few today, and 12 cognitive distortions that we readily know, even around beauty and height. Who would have thought? And we all have ESL, not English as a second language, but everyone's second language, that if we know how to speak it, if we know how to read it, we can take our relationships to a whole new level. And again, either in our interpersonal communications or when we are navigating people through dispute resolution. So Ask yourself, do you know how to use these layers of communication and what they mean? If not, come on, take a journey with me, Dr. D, the Mindset Doc, and discover a whole new world out there.
Thank you for joining us on Decoding the Conflict Mindset. This series was designed to bring to you the best in thought leaders to shape new worlds of thinking about working through disputes in the world, in your community, and in your home. Subscribe so you receive notification every time a new episode is launched.